Good evening. Settle in, lower the lights, and adjust your volume. Tonight on Boring History for Sleep, the thrilling sound of people competently doing their jobs. Try to stay awake. Or don't. Either way, you're in good hands. Follow the river downstream from any bustling medieval town, and you will smell it before you see it, the Tannery. Here hides are turned to leather, a craft as ancient as it is unpleasant, artisanal excellence with a fragrance you would practically chew. Yet without it there would be no sturdy shoes, no belts or saddles, no book covers or armour. In this low, odorous quarter, work is hard, slow, and strangely alchemical, taking raw skin and turning it supple, strong, and lasting, while teaching every newcomer the difference between earthy and oh no. The site is chosen with care, near running water to rinse hides, yet far enough from main streets that its stench does not anger wealthier neighbours who have delicate noses and louder voices. Sheds of timber and wattle lean over pits sunk into earth or lined with stone. These pits hold lime, dung, and tannin-rich solutions, each step a stage in leather's long journey, and each pit a polite reminder to watch your footing. Racks of drying hides hang like ghostly banners. Smoke from small fires carries sharp tang of curing, the medieval equivalent of a neighbourhood fragrance diffuser. Work starts before sunrise. Tanners' hands are calloused and stained, clothes stiff with old brine, haute couture by way of necessity. Apprentices haul fresh hides from butchers, cow, goat, sheep, sometimes deer. Still bloody, stiff, or crawling with flies, these must be scraped clean. Workers spread them hair side up on beams, using fleshing knives curved like moons to strip fat and flesh. It is heavy, messy labour, but first and crucial, you don't get a fine shoe by whispering at a cowhide. Next comes soaking in lime pits, hides lowered into vats of water mixed with quicklime. Over days, lime loosens hair and remaining flesh, while swelling fibres for later tanning. Workers stir with poles, haul out slick hides to scrape hair free. Gloves are rare, skin burns, so many hands bear raw scars, a sort of guild sign you didn't ask for. Yet skill matters. Too long in lime and hide weakens, too short and hair clings. Precision, here, is measured in layers of regret. After liming, hides go to baiting, a gentler soak often made of water mixed with animal dung or fermented solution. It softens fibres, restores some pliancy lost to lime. The smell here is infamous, warm dung and rotting enzymes, a bouquet with notes of why. Tanners, however, judge brew by nose and feel, knowing when it's perfect, and yes, that is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. Cleaned and softened, hides are rinsed thoroughly in river or troughs. Then begins the true magic. Tanning. Pits filled with water and crushed bark, oak, chestnut, sumac, rich in tannins that slowly bind to hides' proteins, preserving and strengthening. Hides submerged for weeks or months, move from weaker to stronger baths in sequence. Workers stir with long poles, lift heavy dripping skins to new pit, test with experienced hands. Time does most of the work. The tanner gets the credit and the smell. While hides soak, other chores fill yard. Bark ground in mills, stored dry then soaked to extract tannin. Apprentices sharpen knives, mend vats, or help craft small leather goods from finished stock. Tools clatter, buckets splash, voices shout over din. Tanners often sing or joke to lighten stench-filled air. They must, for hours are long and work relentless, and laughter is cheaper than perfume. Finished leather emerges, transformed. Pale, tough, flexible, some dyed with natural pigments, oiled with fish or neat's foot oil, rubbed smooth with stones. Rolls stacked to dry in airy lofts or hung to cure in smoke. From here leather travels to cobblers, saddlers, bookbinders, armourers, each adding craft to base material, and none asking too many questions about its origin story. Guild life shapes Tanner's world. In many towns they form Tanner's Guild, setting price and quality, training apprentices, defending trade from rivals. Yet despite importance, tanners often shunned socially for their smell and mess. Houses cheap near tanneries, tanners marry among themselves, practicality masquerading as romance. Still, their coin is solid, and good masters respected for skill, especially by people who enjoy shoes. Apprenticeship is long, often 7 years. Boys, sometimes girls in family shops learn each pit and process, scraping without tearing, judging lime strength, mixing baits, stirring tannin vats just right. Mistakes cost dearly. A ruined hide is wasted wealth. By end they know secrets of bark and beam, smell and touch, guiding choices beyond written rule. Diplomas are issued in stains. Health hazards abound. Lime burns skin and eyes, fumes from rotting pits cause sickness, heavy hides strain back and shoulders. Yet pride keeps workers going to hold finished supple leather and know it will travel far, as boot, saddle, or bound gospel. It's gratifying, in a please don't touch your face sort of way. Faith threads here too. Many tanners keep small saints' images in workshop, praying against accident and disease. Some invoke St. Bartholomew or St. Crispin, patrons of leather workers and shoemakers. Holy days give respite. Guilds sponsor church candles or processions, hoping to offset unpleasant repute with piety and perhaps a discreet breeze. Seasons affect rhythm. Winter slows soaking but keeps hides cool. Summer speeds rot and demands fast work. Rain swells pits and can spoil batch if that watched. Supply of bark peaks after spring felling. Hides arrive after autumn slaughter. Thus Tanner's calendar is tied to both forest and field, and the weather's sense of humour. Despite stench and toil, craft has dignity. Without tanners, towns lack shoes, harness for plough and war, belts, cases, even parchment beginnings. Lords rely on leather armour and tack, merchants on strong packs and purses, monks on bound volumes. In every step of life, silent leather serves quietly, sturdily and mercifully deodorized by distance. At day's end, tanners wash as best they can in river, though scent clings with heroic loyalty. They gather for coarse supper, bread, stew, ale, laughing at hardships. Children play among drying racks, immune to smell outsiders shun. Community forms here, tough, earthy, bonded by craft and by the shared understanding that soap only does so much. So next time you imagine smooth leather book or well-made boot, remember this riverside tannery, smoke and bark, vats and knives, men and women enduring foul work to make raw hide into lasting strength. It is unsung labour but foundation of medieval life, proof that civilization sometimes advances on the nose and we love it anyway. Follow the course of a small river or walk to the edge of a windy hill and you will hear a steady heartbeat. The mill. Its turning wheel or sweeping sails power one of the most vital crafts of medieval life, grinding grain into flour. Without the miller, villagers would have no daily bread, no porridge or ale. His world is full of rumble and dust, gossip and tolls, clever engineering and steady, grinding rhythm. Most villagers know 2 types, watermills and windmills. A watermill crouches over stream or river, its great wooden wheel half submerged, turning by push of current. A windmill towers on hill or open plain, sails creaking as they catch sky's breath. Both hide clever gears inside, translating slow turning of wheel into fast spin of millstones that crush grain. Approach a watermill on misty morning. You hear splash and churn as wheel dips and rises, dripping silver arcs. Mill race channels water from stream, Guided by sluice gates, the miller adjusts. Sometimes wheel is undershot, pushed by flowing water beneath, or overshot, with water pouring over top for greater force. Timber groans, moss clings to damp stone walls. Inside, mill is cool and dim, heavy with scent of grain dust and oil. Shafts of light pierce from small windows onto turning cogs and belts. The main shaft, powered by wheel outside, drives gearing, great wooden cogs mesh with iron teeth, transferring motion to the runner stone. This heavy round slab spins above a fixed bedstone, crushing grain poured through central eye. Groaning rhythm shakes floor. Fine flour drifts like pale smoke. The miller is master of this machine. Broad-shouldered from hauling sacks, hair and beard dusted white, he listens to stones with musician's ear. Too tight and flour scorches, too loose and grain escapes whole. He adjusts dams, gates and gears, oils bearings and keeps water flow right. His hands forever smell of grain and grease. Grain comes in steady stream from peasants and farmers. Men and women arrive with sacks of barley, rye, oats or wheat. Each sack weighed and recorded. Milling free, the miller's toll claims portion of flour as payment, often set by lord who owns mill. Toll may be 1/16 or more, measured by special scoop. Disputes common. Farmers suspect miller takes too much. Miller swears fairness. His reputation rides on honesty, though many jokes paint him sly. Apprentices and helpers haul sacks up to loft, where grain emptied into hopper above stones. As runner turns, grain dribbles between stones, ground to meal and guided out spout below. Sieves may sort fine flour from coarser bran, finished flour bagged and returned or sold onward. Dust thick here. Sunlight turns it to drifting gold motes. Millers often more prosperous than common peasants. Mill is lord's valuable asset. Some millers lease it and keep profit after rent. They handle steady flow of goods and news, who had good harvest, who struggles, which fairs need flour. Thus mill often becomes gossip hub. Farmers chat waiting their turn. Miller hears every rumour and marriage plan. Life not without risk. Gears can maim careless hands, millstones weigh tons, grain dust explosive if spark ignites, though rare, deadly fires remembered. Water wheels jam in flood or ice, windmills suffer storm damage. Millers must be part engineer, carpenter, blacksmith and farmer to keep wheels turning. Seasons rule. Autumn busiest as harvest fills bins, mill runs long days, sometimes nights, lanterns glowing from windows. Winter slows if streams freeze or wind dies, but still some grind stored grain. Spring repairs wheels, dams, sails. Summer sees steady moderate work. Rain and drought both threaten. Too much water floods race, too little stalls wheel. Faith touches mill too. Many keep St. Arnold or St. Honoré images for blessing bread and beer. Some mills have tiny shrines by door. Miller may cross himself before opening sluice. On feast days mill might close so all did attend mass and fair. Windmills are marvels. Great sails angled with cloth or board catch breeze. Miller climbs long ladders to reef or adjust. Whole cap of mill turns to face wind creaking. Inside similar gear drives stones, but more complex to keep speed safe in gusts. From miles away, spinning sails mark kite and hope for surrounding farms. Children love mill rushing water, turning gears, flower-scented air. They peer at wheels, chase chickens in yard, beg bran for animals. For them mill seems magic, though Miller reminds, magic is careful measure and years of skill. When night falls, mill slows and quiets. Wheel still turns slowly and stream song sails creak once more before stopping. Miller sweeps flour, checks dam and shutters windows. Home may be attached, warm kitchen smelling of bread and ale. He eats hearty supper, proud of work that fed village this day. In tales and proverbs, Miller stands between worlds. Not noble, not poor, a little mysterious, sometimes trickster, sometimes wise man. His mill hums with power both natural and human, taking raw harvest and make life staple. So picture this miller's world, river wheels splashing, or great sails turning against sky, gears thundering, steady sacks piled high, flour drifting like pale snow. A craft humble yet vital, binding field to table, farmer to town, harvest to daily bread. When rumours of war spread through a medieval land, few fears weighed heavier than word that an enemy host was coming, not to pass through, but to lay siege. For a castle and the villages bound to it, siege meant long waiting, slow hunger, and a test of courage that could stretch weeks or months. Yet it was also a strangely quiet kind of war, more about endurance than constant battle, a contest of patience with very loud punctuation. It often began with distant news, a rider arriving dusty, reporting a rival lord's march, or merchants fleeing roads. The castle's bailiff summoned tenants, watchmen doubled patrols, carpenters shored gates and bridges, peasants hurried to bring animals and grain within walls if room allowed, others hid food in woods, hoping invaders would not find it. Bells rang to call all who owed defence, knights, men-at-arms, even farmers with bows or spears, everyone invited to the world's least festive sleepover. Inside the castle, life turned to preparation. Wells were tested, cisterns filled, the bakehouse worked non-stop to store bread and hard biscuit. The brewhouse filled tons. Salted meat, cheese, dried beans and ale were stacked in storerooms. Women sewed bandages and patched armour. The smith hammered long into night, repairing hinges and sharpening arrowheads. The chapel echoed with prayers for deliverance, faith and logistics in close cooperation. On ramparts, soldiers checked engines, catapults, mangonels, perhaps a ballista. Archers gathered sheaves of arrows. Stones were stacked for dropping on attackers. Boiling water or sand, cheaper than oil, readied for defence. The gatehouse bristled with murder holes and a heavy portcullis greased to drop fast. Yet for all this, defenders knew patience would be the hardest weapon to wield. When the enemy finally appeared, a dust cloud rose first, then banners and the glint of arms. Peasants watched from walls as columns snaked across fields, infantry, wagons, maybe siege towers lumbering. Trumpets blared, drums beat. Soon campfires ringed the castle in an encircling belt. Escape was cut off. Siege begun. Early days were loud. Attackers tested walls with arrows, shouted taunts, perhaps quick assaults to probe gates. Defenders answered with bolts and stones. But after the first flurry, a siege often settled to a waiting game. Armies knew starving a castle was surer than a costly storm. So the enemy built ditches, palisades, wooden huts. Sometimes an entire small town rose outside, called a siege camp. Markets followed soldiers, blacksmiths, cooks, and women and children arrived. War, being practical, brought its own neighbourhood. Inside, routine formed. Watch shifts manned walls day and night. Lookouts noted enemy works. Sappers digging, engines assembling. Bells or horns warned of sudden strike. Food was rationed early, if wise. Small bread, watered ale, sometimes horse meat when long. Salted fish, beans, and barley gruel sustained many. Wells were watched closely lest enemy poison or cut. Morale became a precious commodity, stored carefully with the grain. Civilians faced the hardest trial. Farmers unused to confinement found walls closing in. Children cried for fresh air. Smoke of many hearths choked courtyards. Waste disposal challenged order. Pits dug, lime spread to keep sickness at bay. Priests preached patience, urging faith. Festivals might still be marked with small prayer or song to lift spirits, celebration trimmed to fit the walls. Fear sharpened each noise. When sappers dug under walls, defenders listened for faint scratching. Miners counter-dug to meet and fight underground, or flooded tunnels. When trebuchet arm creaked, hearts clenched before stone crashed into a tower. At night, campfires of the enemy glowed like stars in a cruel ring, constellations that refused to move. Sometimes relief came, a friendly lord's army marching to break the siege. Then hope soared, defenders lit beacons, readied gates. Skirmishes flared as rescuers fought to reach the walls. If relief failed or never came, despair deepened. Negotiations might open, safe surrender for lives spared, or harsher terms if hunger severe. Disease often struck besiegers as well. Camp filth bred dysentery and fever. Winter cold killed horses. Some castles simply outlasted enemies who sickened or ran out of coin. Thus patience, clean wells, and good stores proved as mighty as swords, if less photogenic. Within the castle, courage took many forms. Soldiers held walls though wounded, women carried stones and water, cooks stretched rations, priests tended the dying and buried dead quickly to prevent pestilence. Minstrels or jesters might sing to cheer the weary garrison. Children ran errands, carried messages, or fetched arrows. Life adapted in strange, heroic ways, bravery measured in small, steady tasks. When breach finally came, wall cracked, gate burned, morale broken, terror erupted. But often surrender preceded storm to spare bloodshed. Terms might allow the garrison to march out with honour, or, in harsher times, yield everything. Lords bargained ransom. Common folk hoped only to survive and return to fields that remembered them kindly. After the siege lifted, scars remained. Fields trampled, trees cut for siege engines, wells fouled, houses burned. Survivors rebuilt slowly, remembering long hunger and fear. Yet tales of endurance became local legend. Our fathers held the wall 3 months. Our mothers baked bread from ground acorns. Children grew up proud and wary, knowing the cost of safety. Siege shaped medieval thinking. Castles designed with stronger gates, angled towers, secret postern doors. Communities stored grain and maintained wells. Lords trained men in patience and planning, not only brave charges. War here was chess match more than clash. Silent, grinding, psychological, with victory announced mostly by footsteps going home. Night under siege was its own world. Ramparts lined with silent sentries, lanterns hooded, distant enemy fires ringed the horizon. Some prayed, some wept, some dreamed of rescue. Owls called above, somewhere beyond, wolves prowled empty villages. Inside, children clung to mothers, soldiers mended gear. Each dawn felt victory simply to have endured. So imagine medieval war, not only in open fields, but in long, tense standoff. A siege of a castle tested courage more than strength, will more than weapons. Within thick walls, people waited out fear and hunger, holding the small light of survival until the enemy withdrew or the gates fell. Beyond the shadow of the castle walls, where the fields once grew wheat and the road ran untroubled, a sea of tents now spread beneath a pale autumn sky. The siege camp had been there for weeks, its order and chaos mingling like smoke. At first glance it was only a sprawl of canvas and timber, but within it life moved with its own strange rhythm, a slow, patient heartbeat that could last for months, like a drum determined to be reasonable. The camp woke with the grey light before dawn. Fires, banked through the night, were stirred to life with quiet coughs of smoke. Soldiers stretched stiff limbs after sleep on straw or earth, pulling on boots and padded jacks. From the cook fires came the smell of coarse bread warming and thin pottage bubbling. The sound of low voices, clinking pots, and the distant murmur of watch horns carried through the mist, a lullaby that forgot to stop. The first to rise were the sentries who had kept the night watch. They returned to camp weary but alert, handing over duty to fresh men. Some climbed the watchtowers built of lashed timbers to scan the castle walls, dark and silent against the morning sky. Others patrolled the earthworks that ringed the siege lines, ditches dug deep, stakes planted, and palisades hastily thrown up to keep the besieged from riding out, gardening with fewer flowers. Near the heart of the camp stood the command tent, larger and better built than the rest. Here the lord and his captains gathered each morning to confer. The table within was covered with a rough map of the castle and its surrounding land, marked with stones and bits of carved wood showing siege engines and troop positions. Messengers came and went, boots muddy, bringing word of watchfires seen at night or movement on the walls. The tent smelled faintly of wax, leather, and decisions. Around this hub stretched the ordered rows of knights' tents. Each bore a banner or shield to mark its master. Armour gleamed outside some, hanging from stands. Grooms led heavy war horses to water and feed. Squires bustled, mending straps, sharpening swords, polishing helms. Here life was busier and more comfortable. Chests of gear, proper bedding, and warm meals cooked with spice and wine when supplies allowed, endurance with amenities. Beyond lay the foot soldiers' quarters, rougher tents, huts of wattle and daub thrown together for longer sieges, even holes dug in the earth roofed with planks. Men played dice or carved wood while waiting for orders. Some patched boots, some mended cloaks with bone needles. The air smelled of smoke, sweat, and damp earth. Though life here was hard, a kind of fellowship grew. Men shared fire, food, and quiet stories to pass the endless days, polishing boredom until it looked like routine. The artisans' quarter lay to one side, carpenters, smiths, and engineers who built and maintained the great engines of war. There stood the skeleton of a trebuchet under construction, its massive frame rising like a siege tower itself. Smiths hammered rivets and bolts, sparks flying as they worked on iron fittings. Carpenters shaped beams, planed planks, and lashed ropes. Each blow of mallet and rasp carried across the camp, a slow promise of destruction that kept very sensible hours. Near them fletchers sat beneath awnings, binding arrows and bolts for the crossbows and longbows that lined the siege lines. The air smelled of glue and feather, tar and oil. Children of camp followers sometimes crept close to watch, wide-eyed, until shooed away by tired craftsmen. Piles of finished shafts grew steadily, destined for the bowmen's barrels, the only harvest the fields offered now. Life in a siege was not only war. Traders moved among the tents selling bread, cheese, cheap wine, candles, and dice. Women mended clothes, cooked for soldiers, or tended small children who played at knights and castles with sticks and stones. Minstrels passed through, singing for coins or food. Priests and friars walked the lanes, offering blessings or hearing confessions, under makeshift awnings hung with simple crosses. Even patience likes company. Yet always the castle loomed. Its walls rose grim and silent, banners limp or stirring faintly in the wind. At times archers on the walls would loose arrows, and the watch horns would cry alarm. Then men would scatter to their posts, shields raised, until the danger passed. At other times the besieged hurled stones or flaming pitch, and the outer ditches smoked where firepots fell. Still, most days passed in patience, waiting for hunger or fear to do their work, allies who never hurry. The midday meal was simple, coarse bread, beans or peas boiled to softness, perhaps a bit of salt pork if stores were good. Men ate in groups, some laughing, some silent. Dice rattled on it-turned shields, a dog barked, nosing for scraps. The lord might dine with his captains on better fare, roast fowl, spiced wine, but bade there the talk was of rations, watch schedules, and slow plans, optimism trimmed to fit the ledger. Afternoons often brought work. Soldiers hauled earth and timber to strengthen the ditches and palisades. Others manned the siege engines, testing their arms or sighting their aim. Arbalesters set up great crossbows, winding the heavy strings with cranks. Some dug tunnels toward the walls, sweating in the dark earth, hoping to collapse the stone above. All the while trumpeters and horns passed signals, keeping the great, scattered host in rhythm, a marching band for patience. Sometimes the quiet broke with a skirmish. A sally from the castle might erupt. Gates suddenly flung wide, horsemen thundering out to burn siege works or scatter labourers. Then the camp rang with alarm bells and shouts. Men scrambled for weapons. Arrows darkened the air. The clash was fierce but brief, for the besieged dared not linger long outside. When they fled back behind the gates, the camp slowly returned to its tasks, shaken but alive, like a pond after a tossed stone. As the sun lowered, the camp changed character. Fires were built higher, cooking smells thickened the air. Smiths quenched their last hot blades and carpenters stacked their tools. Soldiers came back from the lines, tired but joking, and gathered in knots to eat. Priests walked again among them, offering evening prayers. The sound of a single pipe or lute might rise as a minstrel played softly for those who lingered by the firelight, music sized for patience. The lord and his captains met once more in the command tent as dusk deepened. Messengers came with news of the day, a tunnel advancing, an engine ready, a sortie beaten back. Plans were laid for the morrow, perhaps a great bombardment, perhaps a new ruse to tempt the castle into surrender. Candles glowed on maps and scrolls while men bent close, their faces lined with worry and resolve. Strategy, too, keeps late hours. Night fell slowly. Lanterns dotted the camp like stars on the ground. Watchfires blazed along the siege lines, their smoke rising straight in the cool air. Sentries took their posts on earthworks and towers, eyes sharp for movement on the walls or a sudden sortie in the dark. Far off, the castle showed only a few dim lights, silent and unyielding. The war was a long waiting game, and night was part of its quiet wait. In the soldiers' tents, men settled to sleep. Some whispered prayers, fingering small charms. Others simply rolled in their cloaks and closed weary eyes. Children huddled close to mothers, dogs curled near the fire. The camp, so noisy by day, hushed to a murmur of low voices, crackling fires, and the occasional clink of armour as a sentry shifted on watch, the sound of responsibility turning over. The falcon cry of an owl passed over the darkened field. The slow creak of a trebuchet under construction echoed once and stopped. The siege camp rested, but it was never wholly still. Somewhere men dug tunnels by torchlight. Somewhere captains whispered of dawn assaults. And above it all the castle loomed against the stars, silent yet full of listening ears. At first light the horns would sound again, fires would be stirred, bread broken, and the patient labour of war would resume. A siege was not glory but endurance, and here in this sprawling sea of tents, men learned to wait as long as stone could hold. Beneath the castle, far below the echo of the great hall and the warmth of hearths, lay the dungeon. Few went there willingly, clearly the marketing never quite took. Its stair began behind a thick oaken door banded with iron, a door most passed without thought, though all knew what lay beyond. Down the winding steps the air cooled and grew damp, carrying a scent of stone, moss, and rusted metal, the house blend. A single lantern, swinging from an iron hook, lit the descent with wavering yellow that did nothing for the decor and everything for the nerves. The keeper of the dungeon lived above its door in a narrow chamber, simple and spare. He was an older man with quiet eyes, neither cruel nor kind, simply patient in the work that had been his for decades, the very portrait of "this is fine" rendered in wool and keys. At dawn he woke, lit his lantern, and went below to check his charges. He moved with slow, measured steps, his keys clinking softly at his belt. The dungeon was not a place for haste. It had all the time in the world, and then a little more. At the foot of the stair stretched a passage of rough stone, arched and low. The walls sweated moisture. The floor was cold underfoot, as if the hill itself had decided to be unsociable. Doors of heavy oak lined the corridor, each bound with iron and pierced with a tiny grating through which air and light could enter, and hope, regrettably, could peer in and think better of it. Beyond them lay small cells, straw on the floor, a jug of water, a low wooden stool or none at all. The dungeon was meant to hold, not to comfort. It excelled at least one of those. The keeper's first task each morning was to check every door. He pressed his weight against the great bolts, tested the locks with his ring of keys, and spoke a low word to any prisoner within. Some answered politely, some cursed or begged. He met each with the same Seven voice, customer service, Stone Age edition. Then he made his round with a bucket of water and a basket of coarse bread. Each prisoner received his ration through the narrow hatch, enough to live, never more. It was the sort of diet that made a man philosophical, and not in a cheerful way. By mid-morning the place had warmed slightly from the world above, though no true light reached here. The only glow came from the keeper's lantern and a few small oil lamps set in iron brackets along the wall. Shadows clung to the corners like tenants who had lost the lease but refused to move. The air smelled of damp straw, stone, and tallow smoke. Rats sometimes skittered, but then they moved quietly, aware of the hush. Professionals respecting professionals. The dungeon held many kinds of souls. There were petty thieves awaiting judgment, poachers caught in the Lord's forest, drunken brawlers cooling their tempers. Sometimes a captured spy or a rebel noble would be lodged in the deeper cells, chained and guarded day and night. Each had his story, whispered or shouted through the grating, a library of unreliable narrators. The keeper listened rarely. It was not his place to weigh truth. He was there to keep, not to judge, and he performed that calling with the kind of modest pride usually reserved for well-swept thresholds and properly counted spoons. From time to time the steward descended, brisk and efficient, to speak with a prisoner or deliver orders from the Lord. Guards might come too, clanking and laughing uneasily, to fetch a man for questioning or release. Nobody jokes quite as loudly as someone who very much hopes never to be on the other side of the door. The chaplain sometimes visited, bringing quiet words and prayer to those who would hear him. His lantern light and murmured Latin made the dark seem briefly less heavy, like a hand on a shoulder that did not promise rescue, but did insist on courage. The cells nearest the stair were for short stays. Farther down the passage, past a second door thick with iron, lay the long-term keeps, colder, narrower, with chains fixed into the stone. Here the air was bitter with damp, and silence deeper, as if sound itself had decided to winter elsewhere. The keeper disliked this part, but tended it dutifully, checking each chain and lock. If a fire burned in the great hall above, no warmth touched these walls. News of comfort travelled slowly and often lost its way. In the middle of the day the keeper paused to eat a small meal by the stair, bread, cheese, perhaps a bit of broth brought by a boy from the kitchens. He sat with his lantern beside him, listening to the muffled sounds of the castle far above, faint echoes of hammers, bells, and sometimes laughter drifting down the spiral like postcards from another country. Here, life moved at another pace, slow and watchful, and the clock was a drumbeat of water in the stone. Sometimes a new prisoner arrived, Then the dungeon stirred with sudden noise. Boots on stone, orders shouted, a man protesting or weeping, the usual musical. The keeper would step aside as guards led the captive past, then follow to bolt the door once it closed. The air would be thick with the scent of fear and sweat, and for hours the hall might echo with cries until quiet returned, bringing with it that solemn companionship of stone and straw. On rare days the dungeon held someone of rank. Then candles were lit in the upper cells and special care was taken. Better straw, a stool, perhaps writing tools, luxury, in the modest way that only a basement can attempt. Such guests were guarded firmly but with courtesy. Politics played their games even here, and everyone remembered that ransoms travel faster when the ink is legible. The keeper knew to say little, to move with bowed head and keep the lantern steady. By afternoon the dungeon fell silent again. Prisoners slept or brooded, their voices stilled by the weight of stone. The keeper mended what needed mending, straps for shackles, a broken lock, the rope of the bucket lowered into the well. He swept the passage, though the damp never let it stay truly clean. Tidiness in theory, mildew in practice. His was a craft of maintenance, patient and invisible, the sort that prevents catastrophe and receives precisely no applause. Toward evening came the second round of water and bread. The keeper carried his lantern from cell to cell, setting it down to open each hatch. Some prisoners muttered thanks, others stared blankly. A few begged for news of the world above. Was there a feast? Had judgment been passed? He answered with the barest facts, kind but distant truth carefully portioned. Like everything else down here. It was easier that way and safer for hearts that must be steady tomorrow. When night fell, the dungeon grew colder. Moisture gathered on the stones and the air turned still. Above, the castle feasted or slept. Below, only the keeper and his lantern moved, a tiny sun with a very small solar system. He made one last round, checking every bolt and lock, banking the tiny fires in the brazier by the stair. Then he climbed slowly upward, leaving the dark behind. The prisoners settled to uneasy sleep, their breathing and the faint ruster of straw the only sound, a choir that hoped not to be noticed. Sometimes, in deepest night, a horn would sound, or boots would thunder on the stair. Then the dungeon woke abruptly, a new captive, a midnight judgment, an urgent message from the Lord. The keeper roused himself and obeyed. Habit is a better alarm than bells. But most nights passed in quiet, the silence broken only by the distant drip of water and the sigh of sleepers, the lullaby of consequences. At dawn the pattern began anew. The keeper returned with lantern and keys, faithful as the turning of the seasons. He found each cell as it should be, each prisoner present and alive. Bread and water were passed, straw changed where needed, locks tested. Life here was narrow but steady, an unseen foundation of the castle's power. Glamorous, not sung about, but astonishingly reliable, which is why power trusts it. Above, men feasted, judged, and rode to war. Below, in the cool dark, the dungeon held fast, silent and sure. Its stones knew secrets no feast would tell. Its air was heavy with forgotten hopes and quiet endurance. And though few wished to think of it, every man in the castle, from lord to lowest page, knew that this place waited if the law or fortune ever turned against him. The dungeon kept its watch without banners, without music, and, most impressively, without complaint. At the far edge of the castle yard, beyond the stables and kennels, stood a quiet row of timbered sheds and fenced pens. This was the Falconer's Mews, a place of keen eyes and swift wings, where the art of hunting with hawks and falcons was tended with care, and with the sort of patience that refuses to be hurried by nobles, weather, or gravity. Though the castle bustled with soldiers and servants, here a calmer rhythm ruled, one of feeding, training, and trust between man and bird, with the occasional reminder that the bird is in fact the talent, The Mews woke early. Before dawn, the falconer rose from his small loft above the sheds, pulling on a thick wool tunic and leather gloves. He moved with soft, deliberate steps, so as not to startle the birds still sleeping on their perches. Nothing ruins a morning like a peregrine's opinion. Each was hooded, resting in darkness, feathers sleek and heads bowed. Only the faint creak of leather and the rust of straw broke the stillness as he lit a single lantern, mood lighting for professionals who hunt breakfast. His first task was to greet each bird. Moving from perch to perch, he checked jesses, the thin straps of leather fastened to each leg, testing their knots and condition with the attention some men reserve for heirloom swords or temperamental uncles. He touched each hood gently, murmuring a soft word to soothe the bird beneath. Here perched proud goshawks and slender peregrines, here stoic kestrels and a single rare gerfalcon, pale as winter cloud and twice as haughty. Each had a name known only to the falconer and his young apprentice, a secrecy that kept the birds from learning they were minor celebrities. Next came feeding. Small wooden boxes held yesterday's quarry, rabbits, pigeons, and morsels of fresh meat. The falconer weighed each portion with care. Too much would make a bird heavy and slow, too little would leave it weak, there being no glory in a champion who refuses to fly for reasons of lunch. With gloved hand he offered the meal, watching each falcon tear and swallow with sharp, clean beak. The sound was soft but purposeful, the morning breaking with the rust of feathers and the faint crunch of bone. Breakfast music, if your tastes run to the practical. The apprentice arrived then, rubbing sleep from his eyes but eager to learn. He swept the mews, changing soiled straw for clean, and scrubbed the shallow water troughs where the birds bathed. The falconer guided him with calm patience. How to carry a hawk without alarming it, do not announce surprises. How to keep the leather supple. How to read the faint shifting of feathers that meant contentment or unease. In other words, how to hold a conversation with someone who doesn't speak and has knives for hands. When the sun lifted above the walls, training began. The falconer chose one bird at a time, lifting it gently from the perch to his gloved fist. He carried each out to the practice green beyond the yard, where a low post stood with a lure, feathers tied to a line to mimic prey. There, with slow care, he removed the hood. The bird blinked at the light, eyes sharp as polished jet. One does not need poetry when one has that stare. Then, with a flex of wings, it launched skyward, as if gravity were only a rumour. The falconer worked the lure in smooth circles, calling softly. The hawk soared, wheeled and stooped in swift dives, striking the lure with a clatter of feathers. The apprentice gasped each time at the grace and speed. The falconer only smiled faintly, patient and precise. A man who knows that excellence looks like magic to everyone who hasn't put in the hours. When the bird returned, landing steady on the glove, it was rewarded with a morsel of meat and a quiet stroke along its breast. Payment on delivery. Contracts are simple at altitude. Each bird had its own temperament. Some were fierce and quick, eager to strike. Others calm and deliberate, watching long before moving. The falconer knew them all, which needed gentleness, which firmness, which would hunt hare, which would take birds on the wing. His work was part art, part science, and wholly trust. No knight could simply take a hawk and fly it well. Years of patience lived in each smooth motion of man and bird, a partnership in which one partner can leave at any moment and frequently does, just to keep the paperwork interesting. Visitors sometimes came to the Mews. A lord wishing to see his prized peregrine, a lady hoping for a gentle kestrel to ride on her wrist, or children curious to watch the training. The falconer greeted them politely but sparingly. His world was quiet and required care, and spectacle tends to shed feathers. Still, he would sometimes let a child stroke the soft breast of a hooded bird, or show a noble guest how to tie a proper jess. Always the birds were treated with respect. They were hunters and companions, never pets. One does not keep thunder on a string and call it a lapdog. By midday the Mews hummed with small labours. The apprentice oiled leather hoods and jesses until they gleamed. Feathers shed in training were gathered to mend lures. Records were kept of each bird's weight and health, written in neat hand by the falconer himself. Ledgers where the margins contain more wisdom than sermons about pride and portions. Outside, the castle might bust with messengers and soldiers, but here was a calmer world of care and craft, where success smells faintly of tallow and rappit. In the afternoon a hunt might be called. If the lord desired fresh sport, a page came running to the Mews with the order, breathless, important, and vaguely surprised that hawks cannot be boiled up at once like soup. Then the falconer and apprentice sprang into practised action, selecting the right birds, weighing them one last time, fitting hoods and bells to their legs, and readying gloves and perches for travel. Soon the hunting party would ride out through the gate, hawks perched proudly on leathered fists, bells chiming softly as hooves clattered over the drawbridge, a procession equal parts pageant and logistics. The falconer rode near the front, his trained eyes scanning sky and field. At his signal, a bird might be unhooded, its keen gaze locking on prey below. Then, with a sudden rush of wings, it would fly, swift, silent, deadly, stooping to strike a hare or flush a bird from cover. The falconer would ride hard to follow, the apprentice behind him, ready with lure and food to call the hawk back once the hunt was done, because talent returns for pay, not applause. When the hunting party returned at dusk, the Mews grew lively, birds were unhooded for cleaning, their feathers gently smoothed, their talons checked for breaks, performance review with manicure. Each was fed a measured meal and set again on its perch, where it would settle with a rustle and tuck its head under wing. The falconer moved from bird to bird with quiet murmurs, proud yet humble before their fierce grace. Humility comes easily when your colleagues can outclimb clouds. After the birds were tended, the Mews fell peaceful again. The apprentice swept the floor and hung the gloves to dry. The falconer checked each perch, tightened each knot, and banked the small brazier that kept the night chill at bay, a modest sun for a modest kingdom. Outside the yard echoed with laughter and clatter from the great hall, but here only soft rustles and the occasional tinkling of bells broke the dark, as if the stars themselves were rehearsing. Before sleep the falconer took one last walk among his charges. He touched each hood lightly, feeling the steady stillness beneath. He listened to the slow shifting of feathers and the faint breathing of birds at rest. These were hunters, noble and wild, yet they had learned to trust him, a miracle achieved daily by showing that on time with food and respect. It was a quiet bond, one that asked patience, respect, and deep understanding, and repaid them by reminding men that freedom can sit calmly on a glove. At last he doused the lantern and climbed to his narrow loft. Through the tiny window he could see the night sky, vast and cold. Somewhere an owl called. Professional courtesy. Tomorrow would bring new hunts, new training, the same steady care. The Mews slept, filled with hidden power, swift wings, sharp talons, and the calm hands that guided them, a small disciplined cosmos orbiting the simple truth that trust flies farther than force. Before sunrise, when roosters still doze and only a thin silver mist hangs across the fields, one sound sometimes stirs first, the hollow sigh of a leather bellows. It comes from a low stone workshop near the crossroads, where a faint orange glow leaks between shutters like a secret the night forgot to keep. This is the village forge, a place of warmth and metal, of sweat and steady rhythm. Also the unofficial office where broken objects file their complaints and emerge chastened. To live in a medieval village is to know this place well. You may be a farmer, a miller, a brewer, a shepherd, All roads lead here when something breaks or must be made, which is to say most days ending in day. The blacksmith is it merely a tradesman? He is part mechanic, part engineer, part quiet guardian of the community's strength, an artisan who can fix your plough, shoe your horse, and if pressed, your mood. Fire before dawn. The smith wakes before most folk, because iron does not bend politely at luncheon. His cottage, usually attached to the forge itself, smells of smoke and warm bread left by wife or daughter, domestic diplomacy at its finest. Outside, stars fade as he crosses to his hearth. Last night's coals may still hold a whisper of heat. If so, he stirs them with practised care, like a man convincing an old friend to try once more. If vit, he strikes flint to steel, catching spark on dry moss. Soon the fire takes, feeding on charcoal he has stored all year like treasure he intends to spend wisely. Charcoal is precious. In spring and autumn, woodcutters burn oak and beech in slow, smothered piles to create it, a smoky labour the smith often oversees with the vigilance of a banker watching coin minted. Without charcoal, his fire would burn too cool for iron. He tends the bellows, great leather lungs hinged to a beam, pumping air until the heart of his forge glows white. Sparks leap upward like small fireflies attempting sainthood, and shadows jitter across the timbered walls. The forge smells different from any other place. Sweet, dry charcoal, acrid iron scale, damp leather, a faint tang of oil. To step inside at dawn is to enter another world, half workshop, half cavern of flame, wholly persuasive about the value of staying alert. Tools of the trade. Every tool has its spot. The anvil, massive iron face, squats at the centre like an altar to practical miracles. Hammers hang nearby, crosspeen for drawing metal, ball-peen for rounding, straight-peen for edging, all eager to contribute opinions. Tongs of every length line the wall, each shaped to grip some particular stock that refuses to be held by mere fingers. Hardy tools fit the anvil's square hole, swages, fullers, cutters, the punctuation marks of metalwork. Beside the fire stand buckets, one of water for quenching, one of oil for slow cooling, and sometimes a tub of sand to catch sparks or temper blades with less drama. The smith knows his tools like friends. Each bears scars of long use, each fits his hand's memory. Apprentices are taught first to clean, and return them in perfect order, for a smith's rhythm falters if he must search when metal is white-hot. Iron has a notorious dislike for waiting. Morning trade. As the fire wakes, so does the village. Soon boots scuff on packed earth outside. The first arrival may be a farmer with a ploughshare cracked on a hidden stone, the sort of treachery stones specialise in. He lifts the heavy iron onto a bench with a groan of relief. Next comes a shepherd boy clutching broken shears like a confession. A brewer's servant might appear needing a fresh hoop for cracked barrel ale, being a poor candidate for escape attempts. The smith nods, inspects, and sets each item aside, already deciding which will heat first, a triage of usefulness and soot. Payment varies. Some customers carry coin, but more often they bring eggs, butter, wool, or promise of grain come harvest. The smith keeps mental tallies. He knows which neighbours pay promptly, which struggle, which repay with favours, which bring gossip unasked. In a community where cash is rare, trust is as vital as hammer. Both, notably, are flattened disagreements. Then comes the sound of hooves. Horses are the blacksmith's special pride. Whether great cart beast or small farm pony, each must be shod for work. Shoeing requires patience. The animal snorts, uneasy at sparks and clang, unpersuaded by lectures on civic duty. The smith speaks softly, lifts hoof, trims horn with practised knife. A glowing shoe, fresh from fire, is pressed briefly to shape hoof. Steam hisses, the scent sharp but harmless, and the onlookers wince on principle. Nails are driven quick and sure, clenched tight, and the horse stamps ready for road. Farmers judge a smith by his farriery. A well-shod horse is strength for plough and wagon alike, and a poorly shod one is a letter of complaint with legs. Apprentices and learning. Few men are born smiths. Most begin as apprentices at 12 or 13, when enthusiasm outweighs good sense. They are sent by parents or bound to master by formal agreement. The apprentice lives half servant, half student, stoking fire, working bellows, sweeping floor, fetching water, grinding edges, learning that soot is a lifestyle. Yet he also watches how master reads iron's colour, how he lifts hammer with grace, how each sound tells of heat or hardness like a secret language spoken in sparks. Training lasts years. A boy learns first to strike while master holds heavy sledging in rhythm, sparks flying, confidence negotiated every blow. Next he shapes nails, rivets, small hooks, alphabet of iron. Slowly he learns welding, heating 2 pieces to white, sprinkling sand, striking just so until metal fuses seamless and pride tries not to grin. Only after long practice may he fashion complex items or attempt tempering of blades. When ready, he becomes journeyman free, to travel and work in other forges, seeking mastery and perhaps someday opening his own shop, where he too will explain patiently that hot means do not touch. Guilds, where towns are large enough, protect the craft. They set prices, quality and training standards, and, crucially, opinions about whose iron is inferior. Even in villages without formal guild, smiths share a brotherhood of skill. Strangers passing through may trade tips or borrow coal in need, because fire recognizes kin. The metal's journey. Iron itself arrives by trade and toil. Local ore, dug from shallow pits or bogs, is smelted in simple furnaces called bloomeries. Charcoal feeds the fire until ore yields a spongy bloom of iron that looks nothing like a sword and everything like potential. This crude lump is hammered to drive out slag, then carted to smiths. Some villages buy bars from merchants travelling with pack horses, others smelt their own. A smith learns to judge quality by sound and spark. Good iron rings true and spit bright white sparks when ground. Poor iron spits dull red and sulks. Charcoal too is vital and costly. Woodsmen cut timber in winter, stack and smother it under turf to burn slowly, producing the light hot fuel. Without steady supply, a forge cools, as do tempers, briefly. Thus Smith's ties to woodcutters and merchants are close. He is part of a hidden network that keeps metalwork alive, a supply chain powered by patience, mules, and smoke. Seasons of work. The forge's rhythm follows the farming year, because iron and appetite consult the same calendar. Spring, ploughs and harrows are mended, horses reshod for fresh tillage, scythes sharpened for hay, optimism is filed to an edge. Summer, carts creak under grain. Their wheels and axles need constant care. Hoes, sickles, knives pass through forge for quick fixes, each returning to the field slightly improved and smelling faintly of triumph. Autumn, tools sharpened for harvest, cider presses and wine screws repaired. Hunters ask for arrowheads and boar spears, the local boars having no vote. Winter, with fields resting, work turns to domestic and craft. Hearth pokers, hinges, locks, cooking spit, ornate candle holders, and sometimes fine commissions ironwork for church door or weather vane for manor, guaranteed to point north, except when corrected by wind and theology. In cold months, the forge becomes village hearth. People linger by fire's warmth, trading news while Smith works, a social contract sealed in soot. Children watch sparks with awe and are reminded, gently, that ore is best admired from a safe distance. In summer, the doors stand wide, swallows dart in and out, and heat shimmers while sweat runs down Smith's arms. Rain on the roof hisses softly as it cools iron smoke weather and work in amiable argument. more than a tradesman. Because he touches every life, the smith is often trusted advisor. Travellers ask him about road conditions, neighbours pause to share worries while waiting. He may quietly keep tally of who is struggling mending tools on credit when harvest fails, because hunger is a debt nobody wants collected. Some villagers believe forge smoke drives away illness. Horses are led in circle round fire to cure lameness. Sick children pass briefly through doorway to banish evil. The smith may smile, unsure if it works, but tradition is strong, and sometimes the heart needs remedies the hands cannot measure. Festivals depend on him too. For weddings he forges new locks or handsome iron gifts. For fairs he makes bells and spits. For building barns he shapes nails by handful, small thunderbolts tamed to hold timbers true. When church needs new bell frame or weathercock, he is called. In a world without mass production, his skill is the difference between want and plenty, between a door that holds and a winter that wanders in. Stories by the Anvil. Every forge gathers stories. Farmers arrive cursing rocks that broke plough. A bride might commission simple iron ring when gold is beyond reach. Love, being practical, approves. Once a travelling knight rides in, armour dented from skirmish. The smith and apprentice spend hours reshaping breastplate with careful blows. And by night the knight offers coin and tale of border wars, both slightly polished. Pilgrims bring news of distant shrines, merchants tell of far cities. Thus a quiet village learns of the wide world through forge gossip, unverified but warmly delivered. Children beg for trinkets. Many a boy treasures first small hook or ring hammered from scrap. Many a girl too, though the scrap does not care who claims it. Some keep old nails as charms. Apprentices from other towns sometimes visit, testing skills and learning local tricks. New ways to hold tongs, old ways to hold one's temper. Over years the forge becomes archive of tiny encounters, each echoing in ring of hammer, a history written in dints. Faith mingles with heat. A small crucifix hangs near anvil, dark with soot, patient with circumstances. The smith might mutter a quick prayer before tempering a blade or striking final weld, not because iron listens, but because he does. On St. Clement's Day, patron of blacksmiths, villagers bring offerings, bread, ale, candles. Sometimes the priest blesses forge itself, sprinkling holy water on anvil and bellows. The bellows, for their part, continue to breathe. Few crafts feel as close to mystery as shaping earth's stone with fire into tools that plough, build and defend. Alchemy with better accounting. Evening quiet. At day's end, the forge glows softer. The last horse shod, the last hinge filed smooth. Customers gather goods, paying in coin, barter, or promise receipts written on memory and reputation. Children linger, sleepy in warmth, eyes bright at sparks that now look like stars with opinions. Apprentice sweeps floor, banks fire under ash to smoulder until dawn, a small sun on furlough. The smith hangs hammers, oils tongs, and steps outside. His body aches, hands rough and blackened, but heart is calm. He has kept the community alive another day, fields ready, carts rolling, doors secure. Above, stars prick a velvet sky. From cottages drift smells of supper and distant song, the village cooling like iron, strong for tomorrow. The forger's place in the world. In chronicles, kings wage war and merchants cross seas, but none of it would stand without countless humble forges that refuse to be dramatic about being essential. Each village depends on one, a quiet anchor of survival. The forge is workshop, news house, healer and hearth. Its fire links earth to sky, ore to bread, danger to safety, converting inconvenience into utility at a very competitive rate. So when you think of the Middle Ages, think not only of castles or cathedrals, but of this modest place, sparks flying into dusk, hammer ringing steady, a man and his apprentice shaping glowing metal while neighbours wait and talk. It is here, in such small fiery rooms, that the true life of the age was forged. And yes, the pun is obvious, but then so is the truth. The narrow lane smells of leather and damp earth, shaded by crooked eaves that lean toward one another like gossiping neighbours. A lantern hangs above a low door marked with a wooden boot, its paint weathered yet clear enough to guide anyone seeking new soles or sturdy shoes. Inside, the cobbler's shop is a quiet refuge from the busy street. The air is warm with the scent of tanned hide, beeswax, and the faint smoke of a small brazier kept glowing to soften glue. Benches line the walls, each scarred by years of careful work. Awls and knives, hammers and tiny nails lie neatly in their places, their handles polished by long use. Strips of leather hang from pegs, some dyed black or brown, others left pale and waiting for the craftsman's hand. Boots in every stage of repair stand ready on shelves, some split at the sole, some needing only a last polish before returning to their owners. The cobbler himself, a man with greying beard and patient eyes, bends over a last wooden form shaped like a foot. He threads waxed linen through a supple upper, stitching it to a stout sole. His fingers are scarred but deft. Each pull is fur, sure, and rhythmic, like a clock's quiet ticking. Now and then he hums under his breath, a tune almost lost beneath the scrape of leather and the brazier's sigh. Beside him, an apprentice sorts tacks into small bowls. The boy's hands aren't yet sure, and now and then a tack escapes and skitters across the floor. He dives to catch it before the master notices. His apron hangs too big, its hem nearly grazing the rushes. When the cobbler calls for thread or glue, the boy hurries to fetch it, eager to please, still learning the shop's unhurried pace. Outside, the lane hums with distant market cries and the clatter of carts over cobbles. Here moves slower. This craft will not be rushed. Each shoe must be measured, cut, soaked, shaped and sewn with care. A hurried stitch will slacken in the first rain. A careless cut wastes dear leather. The master knows it and teaches it, patiently, by task and by habit. On a shelf near the window rests a row of lasts in many sizes, narrow ones for ladies' slippers, broad ones for farmers' boots, even a tiny one for a baby's first shoes. Each bears the marks of years, scratches, stains, initials carved into the wood. Some belong to customers long buried. The cobbler keeps them out of respect and because a grandchild may someday want the same fit as a grandfather. The day's first customer arrives, a miller, hands floured white, carrying boots so caked with mud they seem more earth than leather. He asks for new soles. Road to the mill has chewed the old ones thin. The cobbler turns each boot slow, tracing the seams, testing the heels, weighing the work in silence before naming a price. The miller nods and leaves lighter-footed than he came. Next comes a merchant's wife with a linen-wrapped bundle. She reveals delicate shoes with frayed ribbons and scuffed toes, shy survivors of many dances. Can they be made fine again? A feast approaches. The cobbler smiles, yes, well enough to shine, and the woman lingers a heartbeat to breathe the workshop's calm before she slips back into the street. The apprentice eyes the slippers with interest. They're lighter than the boots he knows, their soles thin and pliant. The master uses the moment, how to handle tender hides, how to stitch without puckering, when to choose soft wax and when hard. The boy nods, trying each motion, fingers clumsy but intent. Midday brings a pause. The cobbler eats bread and cheese, washing it with watered ale. The apprentice chews beside him, swinging his legs, a smear of glue on his cheek. They speak little, sharing the easy quiet while bells and laughter drift in from the lane. Then work resumes, steady as before. In the afternoon a young knight squire arrives, bearing his master's riding boots, fine, but rubbed thin at the stirrup, spattered with road mud. His bow is awkward, his request urgent. The cobbler studies the leather and promises dawn. Relief loosens the boy's shoulders. He bows again and backs into the rain. The master selects a supple, stout hide, cutting with long, economical strokes that waste nothing. Scraps are set aside for patches and straps. Even slivers find uses. Fresh-cut leather scents the room, warm and rich, braided with the brazier's smoke. Rain begins to patter on the eaves. The workshop grows cozier, lantern light turning the benches to gold. The cobbler glances once at the window, raindrops racing down the pane, then returns to his stitches. Rain is good for trade, he thinks. Wet roads thin soles and keep his brazier fed. An older man comes leaning on a stick, holding shoes that have walked a lifetime. He and the cobbler greet each other like kin. The shoes, cracked and faded, fit him as no others do. Could they be mended once more? The cobbler's answer is gentle. Some shoes carry more than feet. They carry days one doesn't wish to set down. The apprentice cuts new insoles while the master guides his hands. The old leather is fragile. The boy's fingers tremble. A touch to the shoulder, a quiet reminder, care over speed. Together they lift the shoes to quiet dignity. Cracks eased, soles fur. The old man leaves smiling, step surer than when he entered. Toward dusk, the cobbler rubs wax into a finished pair of boots until they glow softly. His hands move in small circles. His gaze is far away. Perhaps on the roads these boots will travel. The apprentice sweeps, gathering curls of leather and stray tacks. The broom's whisper mingles with the evening bells. When the day's work ends, the master wipes each blade and awl before returning it to its place. The brazier is banked. The shop falls into orderly hush, the scent of leather lingering like a promise for tomorrow. Outside, lanterns kind along the lane. The cobbler locks the door and slips the day's coins into a small chest. The apprentice yawns, proud and tired. Together they step into the cool, damp air, shoulders easy, pace unhurried. The shop sleeps now beneath its painted sign. Tomorrow it will wake to awls and hammers, to the rasp of leather on wood, to murmured lessons between master and boy. Here patience and skill outlast coin, and every pair of shoes carries the quiet heartbeat of a craft well loved. If the market court is the quiet stitching of a town's peace, the pillory is its sharp needle, public, humbling, and meant to mend what has torn. It stands often at the edge of the square or near the churchyard gate, a stout wooden frame with holes for head and hands, or sometimes only for the neck. Its presence is reminder and warning, but also strangely communal. To stand there is shame, to watch is lesson, to pass by is to weigh one's own conduct, a mirror you cannot avoid by looking away. The structure is simple. 2 uprights of timber, weathered by rain and sun, support a hinged board drilled with 3 round openings, 1 for the head, 2 for arms. Iron fittings hold it shut. A padlock or pin secures it. Some towns have stocks instead, holes for feet, leaving the punished seated. Some have cucking stools to duck scolds in water. But the pillory, tall and central, is most feared. Architecture that points a finger. Morning is the usual hour for penance. After the market court is judged, or after proclamation from the bailiff, the culprit is led out by beadles or watchmen. He or she may be a baker who cheated weight, a fishwife who sold rotten herring, a drunkard who drew knife, a slanderer who loosed tongue too far. Nobles rarely stand here. This is justice for townsfolk and tradesmen. The walk is part of punishment. Beadles carry their staves. Sometimes a small crowd follows, curious or jeering. The condemned may wear placard naming offence, farce measure, scold, drunkard, thief. Bells sometimes toll. At the square, the boards creak open. The head goes in first, then hands. When they close, there is sudden stillness, a person bound and lifted above everyday pace, no longer hidden among neighbours, learning how heavy a minute would be. Shame is the chief tool. People pause at stalls to look. Some laugh, or toss jeers. Children point friends, avert eyes. Yet cruelty is it always the aim. Many watchers remain quiet, some sympathetic. It is expected to feel chastened but not broken. The sentence may last an hour, or until the market bell rings, rarely more than a day. Too long would be seen as harsh and risk pity turning to anger, a lesson some stewards learn the hard way. Still, humiliation can sting worse than whip. A proud tradesman feels weight of every stare, a gossip feels own words flung back. Some weep, some stand stiff and silent, some joke to show spirit. Once in a while a friend slips cup of ale to lips or pats shoulder. The town is it mob alone, it is many hearts weighing justice as they pass, all of them late for something, but stopping anyway. Mischief sometimes creeps in. Children throw soft clods or overripe fruit. Apprentices shout jests. In hard towns stones may fly, though beadles forbid it. Law wants spectacle, maiming. A idle staff or steward's glare can hush a rowdy crowd quickly. The boundary between lesson and cruelty is watched, if unevenly, a fence patched as needed. Some penances take ritual form. A scold, woman or man too quick of tongue, might stand holding heavy stone or wearing paper crown of shame. A cheating merchant might display false weights hung about his neck. A brawler may hold broken knife blade upright as warning. Occasionally offenders are forced to cry out confession aloud. I sold short measure, I struck in anger, I lied before the court. The words linger like smoke above the square, a sermon without a pulpit. Church and town sometimes mingle here. On holy days, offenders may be brought after Mass to kneel and beg pardon before congregation. A penitent might wear sackcloth, carry candle, or process barefoot around church while choir sings a psalm. Such public penance seeks not only to punish but to heal, to bring sinner back inside walls of grace. The curfew bell marks end of many sentences. Beadles unlock pillory, ease aching limbs free. Some punished hurry off, some pause to bow or cross themselves. Friends may gather quietly, shielding from lingering stares. It is strange mixture, humiliation and relief, rebirth of ordinary life after being spectacle. Despite its severity, townspeople often view pillory as practical mercy. It is cheaper than prison, swifter than long trial, less brutal than whipping or hanging. A day of shame to save a man's trade if he learns, a warning without ruin, and the visible nature of it keeps law transparent, all can see, who judged, who punished, and why. The process as public as the penalty. Seasons alter the scene. In summer, bright sun glares on sweating face, but warmth softens long wait. Winter is hardest. Cold bites wrists and neck. Snow or rain soaks clothes, and crowd sympathy may grow. On feast days, crowds larger and more vocal. During Lent, silence heavier with reflection. Night punishments rare. Justice prefers daylight's steady gaze. Children remember these events vividly. A boy watching father's rival in pillory may learn measure of honesty. A girl seeing loudmouthed neighbour shamed may think twice before echoing gossip. The memory sticks, shaping next generation's sense of fairness more than distant laws ever could, civics taught in the square. Yet the system can be bent. Wealthy merchants sometimes pay fine to avoid public shame. Guildmasters shield their own. Some poor souls suffer, while rich offenders slip away. Murmurs rise when this grows too obvious. Town pride rests on idea that pillory stands for all. A wise Portreeve knows to balance mercy and equity. lest trust erode like mortar in rain. Faith lingers after punishment ends. Many walk straight from pillory to church door, kneel and whisper prayer for strength to mend life. Priests sometimes greet them with quiet absolution, for shame is heavy, but not meant to damn. The goal, however imperfectly met, is to reintegrate, to send neighbour home sobered, not destroyed. At dusk, when stalls fold and geese quiet, the empty pillory stands in Square's corner like a silent sentinel. Children climb on it when no one minds, playing justice games. Lovers carve initials in its posts. Travellers glance and know this town keeps its own peace. The wood is worn smooth where countless hands have rested, heads bowed or lifted in stubborn pride. Think of it as barbarity alone, but as mirror of a close-knit world. A wrong there ripples through streets like water. Setting it right needs more than parchment. The pillory and public penance are raw and human, imperfect, sometimes cruel, but aiming to remind rather than destroy. In them we glimpse a society holding itself accountable with the tools it has, hoping the tools improve the people, and the people improve the tool. So when you picture medieval law, do not stop at royal writ or far-off gallows. See the town square, wood dark with rain, bell calling neighbours, offender standing humble while life flows on. Around them weave judgment, mercy, laughter, gossip, and eventual return. It is hard medicine, but meant to heal the body of the town. The morning of the trial broke pale and cool, a thin mist curling above the castle yard, as if the weather too preferred not to take sides. Word had gone out the night before, and by dawn folk from the town and nearby hamlets gathered to watch. Trials were solemn and rare. Most quarrels ended in fines or oaths, but some matters, grave crimes or questions of honour, were left to God's judgment by combat. Today, two men would meet in the yard to prove truth with steel, an argument conducted at sword volume for the benefit of any soul who found logic overrated. The ground had been swept and levelled, sand was strewn to hide the mud and, incidentally, the future, and a rough barrier of timber rails marked the combat ring. At one end stood a small platform for the lord and his household, at the other a raised seat for the steward and scribes who would witness the oaths and, if necessary, explain them later with a straight face. Along the rails townsfolk clustered, murmuring softly, faces pale with awe and curiosity. A few children clung to mothers' skirts, eyes wide, already composing very thorough questions for bedtime. Before the combatants arrived, priests processed into the yard. They bore a crucifix and holy water, their voices low in prayer, as ritual kindly went first. The chapel bell tolled 3 slow notes, calling all to silence and good behaviour. The Lord emerged then, wrapped in a long fur-lined cloak against the chill, and took his place on the platform. Knights stood behind him, helms in hand, faces grave. This was no tourney for sport, this was justice, which employs fewer ribbons and smiles. The accused came first. He was a broad-shouldered man, a miller by trade, his face set and pale beneath his cap. Chains had been struck from his wrists but still hung loose about his belt, a memory with hardware. He walked with 2 guards at his side, head held stiffly, eyes fixed on the sand ahead. Behind him followed his kin, grim and silent. He knelt briefly before the Lord's seat, a courtesy to hierarchy and, perhaps, to luck, then stepped into the ring. Opposite him entered the accuser, a knight of middling years, lean and stern. His surcoat bore his household arms, and he carried his own sword and shield, the sort of accessories that insist one is telling the truth. He bowed deeply to the Lord and then to the priests before taking his place at the other end of the ring. His face was unreadable, his manner calm but intent, the expression men wear when they are certain and would prefer events to keep up. The herald stepped forward, unrolling a parchment that had clearly practiced being important. In a clear voice he proclaimed the matter: an accusation of murder, denied by the accused, demanded trial by combat according to ancient rite. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, quickly hushed. When the herald finished, the chaplain raised his crucifix high, and both men knelt to swear their oaths. Each declared his cause just, and called upon God to grant victory to the innocent, a request notable for its popularity on both sides. Then came the arming. The knight was already dressed in padded gambeson and mail. He strapped on his helm and lifted his shield with practised ease, which is to say with the air of someone who has put on this argument before. The miller wore only a thickly quilted jack and leather cap, his weapon a stout mace provided by the steward, practical, honest, and unlikely to be mistaken for poetry. Both tested their grips and stood ready. The chaplain sprinkled them with holy water. The steward checked that each weapon was sound. The air grew tense and very still, like a held breath deciding to be fair. The Lord rose and lifted his hand. "Let God decide," he said, voice carrying over the yard with the calm of a man not personally required to fight. The herald blew his horn once, long and low. With that the combat began, and the yard remembered how loud faith can be when metal helps it speak. At first the two circled, cautious. The knight held his sword high and shield close. The miller gripped his mace in both hands, eyes darting for an opening that would kindly open itself. The crowd hardly breathed. Then, with a sudden cry, the knight struck, his blade flashing toward the miller's shoulder. The mace swung up in tide to block, the blow glancing off with a dull thud. Sand sprayed under their boots as they closed and broke apart again, a conversation in short, emphatic sentences. Blow followed blow, slow and heavy. This was no swift joust, but a grueling trial, fought by men with fear and faith alike in their hearts, both of which are notably heavy when worn under armour. The knight pressed with skill, his sword ringing against the miller's mace and padded coat. The miller, though untrained, fought with raw strength, his great swings forcing the knight back more than once. Each strike drew gasps from the watching crowd, who were suddenly experts in footwork and very grateful not to be demonstrating it. Between bouts they circled, panting, weapons lowered for a heartbeat. Sweat streaked the miller's face despite the chill. The knight's mail glinted dull where sand clung to it like an opinion. Both glanced toward the crucifix, silent prayers flashing across tired faces. The chaplain murmured softly from the rail, though his words were lost in the wind and arguably not addressed to the wind anyway. At last the fight turned. The knight feinted left and swung right, his sword catching the edge of the miller's cap and cutting deep into his brow. Blood ran down the man's face as he staggered back, proving that red indeed reads from a distance. Still he fought on, roaring with desperate strength, his mace smashing against the knight's shield with a sound like splitting wood and stubbornness. But the knight pressed harder, steady and relentless, driving him step by step across the sand the way patience drives any argument it intends to win. With a final cry the miller stumbled. The knight's sword struck true, knocking the mace from his grasp and sending him sprawling. The field went silent but for his ragged breath, the kind of silence that knows exactly what it means. The knight stood over him, blade poised. Then he stepped back and raised the sword to the Lord in salute, a reminder that ceremony never misses a chance, even when everyone is tired. The herald's horn sounded again, short, sharp, final. The trial was ended. The chaplain hurried to the fallen man, tending the wound with cloth, and whispered prayer. The Lord spoke, his judgment quiet but firm. The knight's cause upheld, the miller guilty in the eyes of man and God. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some sorrowful, some grimly satisfied, all of them freshly aware that truth, when asked to choose a costume, sometimes reaches for steel. The defeated man, bleeding but alive, was taken into custody once more. His fate would be the Lord's to decide, often death, sometimes a fine or exile if mercy was shown, a coin tossed by conscience with many eyes watching. His kin wept softly as he was led away. The victor bowed to the Lord and then to the chapel, thanking God aloud for righteous aid. He looked weary, not joyful, a man who had fought for honour but found no pleasure in another's fall, which is the respectable part of the ceremony no one applauds. As the crowd dispersed, life crept slowly back. Merchants reopened shutters, children, now chattering, chased one another with sticks, turning a grim lesson into a game with the speed only children possess. Yet many glanced back at the sanded ring, its surface darkened by blood. The trial by combat was rare for good reason. It was hard and sobering, a thing that left the heart heavy when justice seemed clear, and especially when it didn't. When the yard emptied, servants raked fresh sand over the marks and washed blood from the rails, housekeeping for history. The crucifix was carried back to the chapel. The herald rolled his scroll and departed with the gravity of a man whose punctuation has consequences. Only the echo of the fight lingered, a memory in the stones and in the hearts of those who had watched, the kind of echo that answers if you call it, and sometimes when you don't. By dusk the place was quiet again, the castle resuming its ordinary life. Yet in every hearthside tale that night the trial was spoken of, the fear, the prayers, the clash of weapons, and the heavy truth that sometimes justice wears a soldier's face and leaves a scar behind. And so the yard slept, the sand smoothed, the rails clean, while memory kept its watch, economical, precise, and in no hurry to forget. At the centre of the town, where streets draw toward one another like threads to a spindle, rises the church tower. Its stone is old and weather-mellowed, patched here and there with newer blocks that shine a paler grey. In morning light the tower looks almost gentle, but close it is a thing of strength. Deep-set slits for windows, a narrow door of oak bound in iron, and the faint ring marks on the step where countless feet have turned in and out. At its crown, shuttered arches hold the dark mouths of bells that have spoken to the town for longer than anyone living can remember. Before dawn, when the streets still dream and frost sits in the seams of the cobbles, Aldrich the bellman comes with a lantern. He keeps its flame cupped, with one palm against the breeze that slides down from the roofs. His cloak smells faintly of smoke and rain. His boots know every hidden dip in the worn stair. He touches the oak door as one greets an old friend and fits the iron key into its familiar bite. The tower receives him with a soft groan as it opens, stone waking to the day's first footfalls. Inside, the tower air is cool, and smells of dust, damp lime, and old rope. The lantern glow finds motes that drift like slow snow, stirring as the door closes. A narrow stair curls upward against the wall, its treads cupped by centuries. Aldrich begins to climb. His left hand knows each stone of the central pier, his right hand keeps the lantern steady. The sound in the stairwell is his breathing, the leather whisper of his cloak, and once, far above, the small iron shiver of a bell settling in its sleep. At the first landing he pauses to set the lantern on a niche and lift a shutter. A thin square of damp blue morning leans into the tower. From here he can see the thatch of the alewife's house, beaded with dew, and the long dark line of the river beyond the bridge. He listens. Somewhere a baker's boy rattles a bucket. Somewhere a dog shakes off the night. The town is stirring, and the hour must be told. He climbs again, passing the clock room where a wooden face and iron hands will later mark the noon. The mechanism hums faintly even at this hour, a patient tick that belongs as much to the tower as the sparrows in its eaves. Aldrich glances at the balance, sets a small weight with 2 practiced turns of the screw, and moves on. Higher, the stair opens to the chamber of ropes, and from the darkness there breathes the dry, clean smell of hemp. Here hang the bell ropes, each threaded through the floor to the loft above. They are thick as a wrist at the base, furred smooth by palms, each finished with a wooler's sally plaited in coloured yarn to tell it from its neighbours. Aldrich touches them one by one, as if greeting a small company. St. Michael's deep tongue, the mid-bell for work hours, the quick little angel bell that runs ahead of the rest. He takes his place, feet set, breath measured, and wraps his hands around the first rope. The first pull is a conversation with weight. The rope yields and then tugs back, and above, wood and iron begin their slow swing. The tower hears this before the town does. Its stones take the tremor like a heartbeat. On the second pull a sound gathers down the rope, rise of a note not yet born, and then, with the third, the bell finds its voice. The hour strikes. 1, then 2, then 3, slow and round, rolling over rooftops like warm bread sent from an oven. Bells speak in more than numbers. Aldrich knows the measure for feast days, the urgency for fire, the long sorrow for a funeral when every stroke falls with the weight of a name. He knows the merry peal for a wedding, when all the ropes are given to willing hands and the chamber shakes with joy. But the dawn hour is a simple speech. Be steady, be ready, take up the work the day brings. The bell's sound travels down lanes, along the river, and out across ploughland just greening under the sky. When the last resonance breaks against the tower walls and slides into silence, Aldrich coils the rope neatly at his feet and lifts his lantern again. His hands have the faint burn of hemp in them, and smell of dust and wool. He climbs one level higher to the bell loft, pushing open a door that sticks when the wood swells with mist. The loft air is colder. Pigeons have left a few white signatures in awkward corners, and a swath of feathers tells of a hawk's swift visit last week. The bells hang like sleeping animals, their bellies dark and glossed in places by fingers and weather. Aldrich runs a hand along the lip of the great bell and feels the shallow nicks of long-ago repairs, the low seam where the founder's skill turned molten metal into voice. He checks the clapper straps, the wooden headstocks, the pins where iron meets oak. A drop of oil on a pivot, a twist of cord where a fray begins, small attentions that keep the bells honest. In the open shutters, daylight grows, showing a pale east and roofs like wet scales. He steps out onto the narrow gallery that rings the loft, one hand on the rail. Here the town lies open like a child asleep. Chimney smoke no more than smudges, the Guildhall roof silver with dew, the square holding its breath, before feet and hooves claim it. Downriver, the mill wheel is still. Upriver, a field shows lines laid for spring sowing, a pattern only the height reveals. Aldrich breathes the cold and lets his gaze rest in each quarter, before returning to his task. When wind comes, it lives here first. It threads the shutters and combs the rope tails and sets the tower to a faint, unthreatening hum. On winter nights it'd make the bells mutter, though they do not move. Aldrich, who has climbed in storms and in the thick hush of snow, listens to wind with respect. He has known a jolt of lightning to drum through the stone and make the farthest windows jump. He has known warm summer air that lifted swallows through the arches and set them to season-long conversations with the bells. Below the loft, in the room with narrow slits for light, sits the tower's small store. Lumps of tallow, coils of spare cord, 2 wedges for the headstocks, a basket with rags, a bit of beeswax for a stubborn pin. A shelf holds a book that keeps the bell ledger, names of ringers, the occasions, the times when weather required a change. Aldrich's script slopes like a hillside, steady and brown. He adds the morning entry with a stub of quill, blowing on the line where the ink pools. As the town wakes, so too does the stair. Footsteps will come later, the sacristan with candles to place before the morning office, the priest climbing with him sometimes to look upon the roofs and the weather. On holy days, boys come to pull the small angel bell in patterns they learn by laughter and correction. 2 strokes and rest, 3 and swing. Careful now, mind your hands. For now the tower is Aldrich's alone, and he takes the quiet as a gift. He goes down to the halfway landing where a little window shows the lane behind the chantry. A cat sits on a barrel, washing its face with solemn gravity. A woman opens her door and shakes a cloth into the weak sun. Steam lifts in threads from her pail. Aldrich smiles at these small signs and descends to the ringing floor for the next duty of the morning. The work bell that tells the craftsman the hour is turned. This one is brisker, a pattern that runs like a quick messenger through the streets. At the rope he sets his feet, and gives the pull its spring. The mid-bell answers with a cheerful round note, lighter than the hour bell but with a soft belly to it. Aldrich shapes it into the known call, quick, quick, pause, quick, pause. Beat that sends shutters opening and doors unbarred. He can almost see the life it wakes. The smith lifting his hammer to its first strike, the weaver's shuttle taking up its dance, the potter setting a hand steady on the wheel. When the pattern finishes, the bell's last smile lingers in the dust and slips away. He takes his bread on the stair, a coarse heel split and rubbed with a crumb of cheese saved from last night, eaten standing with his shoulder against stone. He chews slowly, listening for what the tower tells him. A change in the small tick of the clock's gut string, a rope that sings a little sharper where it rubs. He feels the day settling into its course. The lantern on the niche burns low and he pinches it out, trusting morning to finish the light. By mid-morning the sun finds the east face of the tower and warms the stone to a faint sweetness. Aldrich opens the higher shutters to give the chamber air. He uncoils a rope and lets it lie in loose loops to ease the twist it has held since winter's wet. He tests the clappers by hand, moving each only an inch, feeling the weight his arms know so well. A lark, a mad fool of a creature, wheels up from the square to peep at the strange dark mouths, and then skirls away, leaving a feather caught on a splinter of rail. He frees it and tucks it under the ledger's cover. Below, the square is no longer empty. A girl whose hair plait shines like new straw rushes with a basket toward the baker. An old man carries a stool under his arm and sets himself at the well to tell the day's first stories to any who will listen. A pair of merchants measure each other with eyes polite and cold. Aldrich, who has never been much for bargaining, feels grateful for a life where the day's measure is made in sound. When noon comes, it comes with promise of meat steaming in kitchens and of rest. Aldrich takes the great rope of St. Michael once more. He draws breath and gives the bell its 12. Between each stroke he lets the sound finish its travel, counting in the slow space where the town breathes. In far streets people lift their heads to hear how far the hour has gone. In the fields men stand straight and look toward the tower though they cannot see it. After the 12th, the air holds a moment of fullness like the top of a hill, and then slips downhill toward afternoon. Visitors sometimes climb at noon when the sacristan allows. Today 2 children with round eyes step carefully behind their mother onto the gallery. Aldrich keeps them close, shows them the ropes, not to touch, mind names the bells as if introducing old friends. The children whisper, and their breath makes small ghosts in the cool. He tells them, because they have asked, that the bells tasted the sky in a storm long ago and rang themselves without a hand. He tells them he once watched a flock of swifts turn all at once in the bell's echo and vanish like thrown soot. They stare into the mouth of St. Michael with reverence. Afternoon lays a hand of warmth on the stone. The clock ticks its steady thread, and Aldrich mends a splice where the rope has grown thin. He works with a sailor's patience. Unlay, lay, twist, smooth, wax. He ties a stopper knot at the end where careless hands might have lost it. He oils a pinion in the clock with a drop barely visible, then wipes away the extra, because too much kindness can be its own harm. He rests with his back to the pier and lets the tower's faint hum climb into his bones. If rain comes, he will close the shutters and the world will go soft and near. If wind comes, he will listen to the whale song in the arches and remember the winter of deep snows when he had to climb every hour to knock ice from the bell's lips. Today is temperate. The sparrows peck at lime crumbs by the sill and scold him as if the tower were theirs. Aldrich's mouth remembers a psalm, and he hums a line without thinking, and the tower takes the tune and holds it like a secret. Late in the day, a small procession below catches his eye. A bier with a single white cloth, 2 candles, 4 slow men. The priest's voice carries only as far as the square's edge, but Aldrich knows the shape of those words. He descend. In the rope chamber, he takes the mourning rope wrapped thicker to speak more gently, and draws the bell 3 times slow, 3 times slow, 3 times slow. The sound falls like steady rain. Women in doorways bow their heads, men pull caps low. The tower becomes a throat for the town's sorrow, and Aldrich is careful with the weight of it. When the bier has passed, he hangs the rope back in its place and stands a moment with his hand resting on the woolen grip. He has a small pouch of salt and a heel of bread in his pocket. He eats, thinking of evenings when grief recedes to the edges of rooms but never quite leaves. Slowly, the tower room warms again to the ordinary. Distant laughter reaches him from the tavern door as someone opens it for a breath. The scent of stew coys of a lane and is lost. Vesper's bell belongs more to the priest than to the town, but Aldrich loves it too. Its pattern is patient and thoughtful. He climbs once more as the west reddens. Shadows of the bell braces stretch long across the planks. The rope fur brushes his knuckles. He rings in the measured speech that tells the church to gather, and tells the streets that day is folding itself away. Even those who do not go to prayer tidy their stalls and turn their feet homeward when they hear it. At last the day's work thins to small tasks. He checks again the clock's great weight and sets its pull to the next fall. He folds 2 sackcloths, brushes a line of dust from a sill, writes a last note in the ledger about the splice. He sweeps a few pigeon feathers toward a corner so he may carry them down in the morning. The bell ropes hang resting now, their tails like sleepy cattle in a byre. Dusk fills the stair and the gallery windows dim to pewter. Down in the lanes, voices are fewer. The candlelight in windows walks the walls like tame fire. Aldrich stands on the gallery and takes the town in once more, the miller's boy fetching water, the cooper's yard with hoops stacked like moons, the bridge holding its stone breath over the river's last gleam. He lifts his cap in an old habit no one taught him and no one sees. Curfew is the last duty, and it carries a different weight from morning's call. It says not wake, but rest. Aldrich takes the rope of the great bell and draws the slow, even strokes, leaving room between for the sound to find every tucked-away place. Cats pause, ears pricked. A child turns in his bed and lets go the day's last fret. A woman at a hearth eases her hands from the dough and sets the lid on for morning's rise. The bell speaks, and the town answers with shutters and latches, with banked fires and quieter breath. When the sound has gone as far as it can and faded beyond his hearing, Aldrich coils the rope for the night. He descends by lantern light once more, hand on stone, feet sure as always. At the door he sets the iron bar and checks it twice, then blows the lantern out so the tower's dark may be complete. Outside, the square is a map of small islands of flame and small pools of dark. The tower stands behind him like a resting animal. He walks home by the lane that smells of old wood and damp lime. Those he passes lift a hand, and he lifts his. No one speaks loudly. The day has been said and answered, and night now is a cup to drink from quietly. Aldrich thinks of the bells above him in their nests of oak and iron, the ropes sleeping, the clock's heart taking its careful, invisible steps toward midnight. In his small room he eats a stew warmed on coals and a heel of bread with a scrape of fat. He washes his hands in a bowl and looks at the faint red burns the rope left in his palms, the little hairs of hemp caught like yellow threads. He rubs a smear of beeswax into the skin and it eases. He lies down, hearing in the bone of his head the memory of the day's notes strung like beads. Dawn, work, noon, sorrow, prayer, rest. When sleep takes him, it is with the sense of height and air and the steady companionship of stone. The tower holds the town and is held by it in return. Tomorrow, Aldrich will wake and climb, and the bells will speak again as they always have. Voices of metal and wood and wind carrying through lanes, across water and into fields, telling of tithe and of belonging. For now, the night closes around the tower and the town alike, and all things are measured by the slow, kind silence between the strokes. Some nights the tower's voice is called to sterner work, a flame seen where no hearth should burn, and the tocsin rolls out quick, relentless, a hammering that lifts men from beds and sends a line of buckets threading through lanes. Aldrich rings until his arms shake and the rope scorches his palms. When the last hiss of doused thatch answers from below, he lets the bell fall still, and the town's breath staggers back into its chest. On rogation days, boys with willow poles and the priest with relics beat the bounds of the parish. Aldrich gives them the angel bell in little dances of sound that skip from corner to corner of the sky, a leash of music to keep them together as they vanish between hedges. On the morning of Easter, he rings long before dawn, the note climbing pale air like smoke. On Christmas night, he draws a carol from bronze that needs no words. In plague years, the mourning pattern changes, and Aldrich learns to space grief so that men can keep walking. He ties cloth over his mouth and nose, not because he believes it stops death, but because the smell of the herbs in the cloth makes the hours gentler. He writes names in the ledger until the ink thickens and the quill splits. The bells too seem to tire, their throats roughened by rain and sorrow, but they do not fail. Once in 10 or 15 years the bell founders men come. They climb slow with their iron mauls and narrow eyes, listen to each bell, strike a soft testing blow, and nod. One winter a hairline crack shows in St. Michael's lip. The town draws its breath. Aldrich feels the absence like a lost tooth. The bell is lowered with prayers and curses. A mould is dug in the frozen yard beyond the wall, lined with loam and straw, stamped by bare feet until the earth remembers smoothness. Tin and copper flow like sunlight in a trough of fire. The founder throws a pinch of salt for luck and a nail for memory. When the bell is born again, they pour her name on the waist in Latin letters and carve a little fish for the river. Her first test note is a shy thing, then she remembers herself, and the tower visibly steadies, as if a spine had been set right. Aldrich can tell weather by sound. In clear frost the bells carry like bright glass and seem to ring the stars. In fog they turn thick and woolly, and the sound does not travel so much as swell, as if the town were inside a clay pot. Snow eats sound, wind tears it in ribbons. In harvest, with fields open and hedges laid low, the bells run all the way to the far sheepfolds. In spring, leaves sip at them and send them back green. There is a ringer's brotherhood, loose as old rope but strong. On great feasts, men from nearby villages come, and Aldrich trades places with them, learning their habits of hand. They attempt patterns the young call, weaves not the high art of later ages, but enough to make the tower dance. When the peal goes true, sweat stings their eyes and laughter climbs the stair. When it tangles, they untie it like fishermen with a net, patient, teasing, joking as fingers work. Law and market keep time by the bells. Markets open on the work peal. The assize meets on the stroke of 9. Fines rise when a craftsman cannot swear. by St. Michael's noon that he set measure straight. The watch sets its rounds by curfew. The miller swears his sluice stanzas sung. The ferrymen their first crossing to the dawn bell's tale. Even thieves listen, though they pretend not to. They know when the city sleeps deepest and when the watch turns. The tower too has its folk tales. Children swear that if you climb the stair on Midsummer's Eve and count the treads without misstep, you earn a wish. An old washerwoman tells how, the year the river froze to the bridge, a fox crept into the nave and slept under St. Christopher, and the next morning the bells rang themselves, laughing. Aldrich keeps such stories in the ledger's blank spaces, never part of the record, yet part of what is true. Sometimes Aldrich teaches. A boy whose father is dead, a girl with hands that know looms and want more, he shows them how to stand, how to feel the bells rise in the rope before it shows in the arm, how not to snatch nor let go. You are not pulling a beast, he says, you are keeping company with one. He shows them where calluses will come and how to hold a knife to pare a burr from hemp without nicking the strength from it. He gives them the angel bell first, then the work bell. St. Michael waits. On a night of thunder, Aldrich wakes with the storm already in his bones. He dresses, and the rain nails the streets flat and shiny. The tower door fights him with swollen wood. Lightning walks the sky on iron feet. He doesn't ring in storms, no ringer does, but he climbs, checking shutters, feeling with his hand the tremor the thunder pushes into the stone. In a white pulse of light he sees through the shutter's slit the bridge, a ghost's rib cage over black water, and he thanks whatever saints belong to towers and ferrymen alike that stone can stand what it must. Years gather on the rope like polish. Aldrich's beard goes to iron filings and then to frost. He learns the weight of silence between strokes, as well as the sound itself. He learns to leave room for listening. On his name day the priest reads a list of those who rang before him, a thin line of men, and once a woman marked widow, stout, good hand. He thinks of their palms in his, through tie, and the tower feels crowded in a friendly way. When his back aches he rests on the gallery bench carved by some mason's idle chisel. 2 leaves, a bird with a comic beak. He watches smoke from 100 chimneys draw the same slow letters on the air, and he nearly read the town's mood, a day of quarrels, a day of bargains, a day of births. The bells will write their answering letters soon enough. If you stood outside the walls and listened in the fields, you would hear the bells come like weather. Shepherds know them and answer with whistles to their dogs. Ploughmen stand up leaning on the stilts, and guess which rope is being held. Children collecting kindling in the hedges say the town is speaking, and for once they are exactly right. At the end of harvest, when the last cart has trundled in and the church porch is dressed with a sheaf and apples, Aldrich rings the feast in long, playful phrases. He lets the angel bell chase the work bell, lets St. Michael roll behind like thunder that forgot to be frightening. Laughter lifts with the sound. Even the sour reeve looks gut and smiles with half his mouth. Bread is broken. Songs answer. When Aldrich is old, older than he ever expected to be, he writes an extra page in the ledger. Not a will, that is for the priest. Not instructions, the ropes teach better than words. He writes a few lines about how the bells sound over snow, how fog changes the world to a room, how a cracked bell can sing true if you mind it until the founder comes. He leaves a feather there, and a smooth pebble from the river, and a bent iron nail he once found in the mortar seam, where no nail should be. And, as always, night comes. The tower cools, the ropes hang quiet as sleeping serpents. The clock's heart takes another small, exact step that no one outside will hear, but everyone will live by tomorrow. Aldrich sleeps in his narrow bed and dreams he is walking the gallery while starlings pour like smoke from the shutters. A bell begins, and the town turns toward it in its sleep, like a flower opening. So the days run bronze and oak, rope and breath, stone and sky. The bells knit the hours to the people, and the people to the place. They are made kind and audible, and their keeper is a man with careful hands, who climbs in the dark and speaks for the town at the start and the end of each day. If you pass through that square and hear the note fall round your shoulders, you will understand a little of what it means to belong. Step outside the smoky warmth of a medieval kitchen, and you meet a space as vital as the hearth itself. The cottage garden. Modest in size, fenced with woven willow or rough stone, it was not a place of idle beauty but of life and survival. Here grew the greens for the pot, the herbs for healing, the dye plants for cloth, and the flowers that whispered both faith and hope. Most peasant gardens lay close to house, safe from wandering animals. A low wattle fence kept out geese and pigs, sometimes hawthorn hedge or a simple ditch marked boundary. Fence posts sprouted living shoots and became hedges over years. Inside, soil darkened by years of compost and ash, lay in raised beds edged with stones or woven hurdles. Narrow paths of trodden earth kept muddy feet off tender roots. A few fruit trees leaned over apple, pear, plum, often grafted by a travelling gardener or monk. Bees hummed among spring blossom, and in summer the shade kept lettuces sweet. Tools were few but faithful. A broad spade shod with iron for turning sod, a two-pronged fork for loosening, a wooden rake, a hoe with a narrow blade to sever weeds at neck, a hand knife for harvest, a dibber to set beans and leeks, and a wicker creel or two for carrying weeds and compost. Handles were ash or hazel, blades kept with a whetstone tied to the belt. Repair mattered as much as use. Bindings of rawhide or cord, pegs driven tight, a lick of grease or iron against rust. Work began as soon as earth softened in spring. Household gathered with spade or fork, children fetched water. Women plotted beds with seeds saved from last year and swapped with neighbours. Crops were practical and layered, cabbage and kale hardy through cold, onions, leeks, garlic for flavour and strength, beans climbing poles cut from coppiced hazel, peas twining to wattles, turnips and parsnips fattening below ground, beets and carrots in sandy corner, in warm pockets against a south wall, lettuce, spinach and small herbs that bolted if given too much sun. Goosefoot and orache were welcome weeds when lean season bit. Companionship of plants was old wisdom. Leeks grew between cabbage to trick the whitefly, onions at bed edges discouraged nibblers, dill and fennel lured small bright insects that kept aphids in check. Beans fixed vigour in soil and came down as stalks for winter fuel. Near the doorway a little knot sage, thyme, winter savoury, parsley so the cook could grab a handful in rain without wetting her skirts. The garden was medicine chest as much as larder. Yarrow for wounds, mint for sour stomach and to sweeten breath, valerian to coax sleep, feverfew for headache and fevers, betony for all manner of head troubles, as old women said. Wise hands knew harvest times, morning for sharp oils in mint, noon for camomile's calm, late afternoon for lavender. Flowers served double, marigold, calendula, brightened pottage and healed skin, rose petals dried for winter syrups, plantain cooled stings and bites, comfrey knit bone in poultice, woundwort lived at to its name. Even nettles, scorned by the unwary, were spring tonic and thread when retted fine. Colour came from necessity, not vanity. Woad grew blue in a guarded patch. Its leaves were crushed, fermented, dried to balls, then re-wet and beaten to wake the blue. Madder's roots, dug after 3 summers, gave deep red. Weld offered clean yellow. Tansy, walnut hulls, oak galls, and lichen-coloured yarn in iron or copper kettles set over a side fire. Dye days ended with skeins wrung and hung along the eaves like bright pennants, the yard smelling sharp and strange. Fibre began in the garden too. Flax stood in a rectangular plot, blue-flowered and beautiful. Pulled by handfuls and dried in stooks, it was retted in a pond or slow river, then broken, scutched, and hackled into shinework often shared among households. The tow became coarse thread for sacks, the longest line turned to linen for shifts and cloths. Hemp grew where lords permitted, its fibres twisting into rope and sturdy cloth. Animals wove themselves into the plot's life. Chickens scratched for beetles and offered eggs. A tethered goat grazed edges and manured as she went. A pig rooted the fallow bed before winter, turning soil and eating grubs. Compost heaps, straw, peelings, leaves, dung and hearth ash steamed gently, turned with a fork when tin allowed. Urine-soaked straw quickened the rot. A sprinkle of soil kept smells kind. Nothing was wasted if it could become soil again. Water was fetched and treasured. Rain barrels under eaves caught roof run. Clay jars stood cool in shadow. In drought, buckets came from well, shoulder yoke biting in. Watering was done at dawn and dusk, slowly around roots, never on leaves under hot sun. A shallow channel cut with a mattock could carry a few ladles farther than arms alone. In frost-prone hollows, folks smoked the garden with damp straw at dawn to keep blossom from blackening. In spring, wicker cloches or mats of bracken sheltered tender sets. Seasons steered every hand. Spring sowing, transplanting leeks from nursery rows, first harvest of sorrel and chives, quick salads of young leaves, nettle soup to wake tired blood. Summer, abundance. Staking beans, weeding daily, pinching side shoots, drying and hanging herbs under eaves, cutting greens before they turned bitter, keeping a wary eye for blight. Autumn. Storing and saving cabbages lifted and heeled into pits lined with straw, carrots and turnips clamped in earth founds, onions and garlic braided and hung from beams, apples packed in straw, pears bottled, plums dried on strings, seeds dried in cloth bags labelled in a hand that needed only the shape of the seed to remember. Winter. The garden slept under frost, but still gave leeks and kale from under snow, parsnips sweetened by cold, thyme and sage evergreen for pot and chests. Pests and challenge were constant, and met with craft. Geese pushed through fences, so extra weaving went into the lowest rails. Rabbits tunnelled, so stones and thorn clippings ringed beds. Beetles chewed, so hands patrolled at dawn. Slugs drowned in shallow beer pots. Flea beetles baffled by ash dusted lightly over leaves. Cabbage worms plucked and fed to hens. Scare lines of feathers and shells rattled in wind above peas. Plants that suffered were moved next year. The worst corner rested under buckwheat, or lay mulched and left to heal. Order sat beside wildness. A saint's cross or little painted icon tucked in a corner, a scrap of ribbon tied to a young tree at Candlemas. Holy water flicked over seed at sowing with a whispered prayer. On rogation days the priest led the parish to beat the bounds, and the path circled hedges and plots. Herbs gathered and blessed at Assumption, hung against lightning and illness. Folk swore the garden listened to songs. Mothers sang while weeding. Old men muttered weather rhymes as they hoed. Children learned here as surely as in church. They chased butterflies, yet learned not to trample, brought snails in little triumphs to feed the geese, picked pea flowers by mistake, and were shown the tiny pods forming. Learned names. Good King Henry, Our Lady's bedstraw, St. John's wort, each a story. Old men told tales leaning on spades. Neighbours paused at the gate to swap seed and news, promise aid, or admire a fine cabbage like a small green cathedral. Not all plots were poor. Monastic herbers arranged beds by compass and virtue, with box hedges, arbours, sundials, and lists of simples copied into herbals. Manorial gardens added fish ponds, dovecotes and orchards trained to walls. Yet even in ordered paradise, the hands that pruned and hoed dirtied the same way. Monks wrote recipes for syrups and electuaries. Peasant women held law just as deep, carried in memory and work-hardened fingers. The garden touched every meal. Morning pottage brightened with parsley and thyme. noonday stew thickened with beans and onions, cabbage stewed with a piece of bacon, summer salads of sorrel, cress, and young lettuce on feast days, Leekeno broths, peas pottage, herb pancakes fried on griddle, apples stewed with a thread of honey, mint tea to settle a belly, sage and salt for sore throat, marigold salve thickened with beeswax for cracked hands, dye kettles turned yarn brilliant for winter weaving, flax from the far bed became the very cloth that wiped the table. Wild company was welcome. Toads lived under cool stones and ate slugs. Hedgehogs patrolled dusk. Ladybirds dotted fennel. Bees from straw skeps visited borage and thyme and paid for nectar with honey that lit winter evenings and sweetened medicine. A patch of flowers for bees, mullein, borage, tansy, mallow, stood by custom. To harm a bee was bad luck. When a swarm rose, a pan clanged and a prayer rose too, coaxing them to a new skep rubbed with balm and mint. Soil was a living purse and managed thriftily. Beds rotated in a small dance heavy feeders like cabbage after dunged ground, then roots, then legumes to sweeten the earth, then a resting mulch under straw or leaves. Hearth ash lined sour soil, crushed shells from the river went on onions, soot discouraged pests and fed beans. The earth repaid kindness with tilth soft as cake, and a smell like promise after rain. Making and mending shared space with growth. A bench under the eaves held a mortar for seeds and salves, bundles of willow withies for tying, a pot of lard and beeswax for tool handles and skin, a little still where law allowed for rosemary water and rose attar. A dye corner with a blackened kettle and a pile of oak galls waited for a quiet day. Skeins hung from a hazel pole to show success or scold failure. Festivals marked the plot as surely as the calendar. May Day crowned with flowers, garlands hung on door and shed, midsummer fires blessed herbs that would hang against storm and witchcraft. Lammas loaves gilded with a sprig from the best sheaf. Michaelmas thanked for cabbages and apples. Advent brought rosemary sprigs inside and apples strung to dry. First fruits went to church or poor. Generosity was said to keep soil kind. The year was stitched with small reckonings. Seed saved in paper twists or linen bags marked with charcoal. White bean from Joan, the long parsnip, Madge's kale. Stories attached to varieties like barnacles to a boat. A dry summer taught water wisdom, a wet one taught drainage. A frost taught which wall kept heat longest. Sorrow came in blight or theft, but resilience answered, sow again, share more, learn, and try the other corner next year. In evenings, when work done, garden rested. Sun slid behind hedge, bees quieted. The smell of warm earth and bruised thyme lingered. Parents sat on bench, a child in lap, watching hens settle on the perch. A rushlight glowed by the door, but stars gave truer light. Somewhere, a neighbour's pot lid clinked. Somewhere a dog barked twice and slept. All day's food and medicine whispered out there, breathing gently, waiting for tomorrow's hand. Though humble, the cottage garden was quiet power. It made the poor less hungry, the sick less helpless, cloth more colourful, and lives more rooted. Each seed sown was an act of faith against winter's lean, each herb cut bound family to centuries of tradition. In that small fenced patch, buzzing with bees, green with cabbage and sage, survival and simple joy grew side by side, season after season.